President Furman, I just sent the rest of the emails to people who aren't here yet, so hopefully they should be showing up soon.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'll wait for one more Alder, and then we'll go ahead and get started. We're missing 2. Okay, we'll have the Alders missing catch up when they get here. So I'm gonna go ahead and call this meeting to order. Karen, can you please call the roll?
Yes. President Furman,
Present.
Vice President Curry,
Here.
Alder Bennett, Alder Conklin,
Present.
Alder Figueroa Cole,
Here.
Alder Foster,
Here.
Alder Heck,
Here.
Alder Abbas. You have quorum.
Thank you very much. It doesn't look like we have anybody registered. I'm just going to refresh really quickly. So I think we could probably skip the tech intro.
Yep.
And we will proceed to our agenda. The first item on our agenda is approval of the 6-1 and 6-2 minutes. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve minutes.
Second.
Great. Any questions? No, that works. Any questions, comments, concerns, corrections with the minutes? Not seeing any, I'm going to assume approval by unanimous consent. Moving on to public comment. Again, it does not look like there's anybody registered. So we will move on to disclosures and recusals. Does anybody have any required disclosures or recusals? Perfect, not seeing any. We will jump right into item number 2 on our agenda, legislative item 71798, what is hybrid? I sent out a very slightly modified version of the presentation that we worked as a guide at our last meeting. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll use that to go ahead and jumpstart our discussion. See if I can get the hang of sharing PowerPoints. Give me one moment. Okay, hopefully everybody can just see the PowerPoint presentation and not any of the side stuff. I'm seeing nodding of heads, so we'll go ahead and just jump into it. Today's agenda for this discussion is to start out, the hopeful goal is that we can continue discussions as well as maybe come up with a possible approval of recommendations that we can make for Common Council meeting with a strong focus on our first meeting. We do have public health director here to help us with some of the COVID-19 protocol discussion. So we'll be starting out with that, talk a little about room 201 stuff, a quick update for people, and then just continue to talk about some of the policy questions that we talked about at our last meeting. Future discussions, as a reminder, nothing changed there. We will have need to make a decision at our 621 meeting if we're going to make the 612 Common Council meeting hybrid, and we will debate about whether we do hybrid versus virtual at that meeting. Committee hybrid policies and frameworks, as well as material sharing policies, will all be future discussions. Quick reminder, hybrid is when you have both in-person and virtual together. It's not 100% in person or 100% virtual. At our last meeting, this slide is not new. It is the public health Madison Dane County COVID gathering recommendations. I'm not going to go through all of it again, other than just to note that these policies are available and match very closely with the CDC policies. If we move to a high rating, the big difference is wearing a well-fitted mask indoors. So today, I really do want to have this group focus on talking about what COVID-19 protocols we should be considering for our first meeting. I was provided some information about what the County Board of Supervisors did at their first in-person meeting, which they held at the Alliant Energy Center. They tried to, they did their best to keep supervisors 3 to 4 feet apart. They had stationary mics at the front of the room. For supervisors to walk up to speak to. They had stationary mics near the public and staff seating areas, and they provided masks, hand sanitizers, Clorox wipes were all available. Just thrown out there as just an FYI on what they did. I think the way our room is designed, and we'll be able to use that 201 room, we don't really need to worry about those stationary mics, but the other stuff is certainly helpful to know. Wanted to remind alders that we do have a vaccination policy. New alders, I believe they probably will have gotten a note. If not today, they'll have a note tomorrow to let them know more about that policy. We still have a few alders that are not complying with that policy, and we're trying to get them in compliance, and we'll have further discussions about that if necessary here. But that policy had a deadline of the end of January for alders to provide vaccination information. And if they weren't vaccinated, to do PCR testing weekly if not vaccinated. There are several alders that have not complied with that. I guess it really just hasn't been much of an issue since we haven't talked about being in person. But I think the things that we could talk about in the future are, whether or not we want to waive the testing requirement, because I believe the city has done that for employees. And then also, what the appropriate way to deal with the violation of the policy that the council passed 20-0 in January. So we can talk more about that in the future, but I'm hoping that that it's just people just didn't get around to sending the information, and we get that resolved pretty quickly. So some things to think about and talk about in our discussion for meeting protocols are whether or not we want to require masks, whether or not we want to have any sort of room limits, or any other requirements tied to COVID-19 levels. So do we want to be thinking that if we're at high, we do something different opposed to medium, opposed to low? Open to questions, ideas, and suggestions. Janelle is here really just to be a resource. I think really this is entirely up to us. I think it's important for us to set a good example in whatever behavior we do, but I do want to just open the floor for people to talk about their thoughts on what we can do so people feel comfortable when there is the in-person component. So who would like to start? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you. A couple questions. One, I don't know if this is part of any of the testing that has been started, but are there thoughts about using the kind of previous seating arrangement that we used to do there, or an updated version, or what? I guess what's the current thinking around how I guess alders would be seated within the room?
It's a good question. My understanding is from talking to IT and the room layout is the thought that we would be using our previous layout, which is, the alders in the first 2 rows, and they're the seats that alders previously used. The microphone system as well as the camera system is very much set up to make that work. I think we have to decide if we want to do something differently and what the ramifications are of that, to be honest.
So I mean, fairly close to each other, I guess. In terms of the masks, I guess a question for Janelle. I know in some settings and in the past, I've seen situations where the kind of people speaking would lower their masks just to be more intelligible. Any thoughts about, I guess, just broadly sort of value importance of masks in our current environment, and that question of kind of how do things change? Does it make sense to, if you are wearing a mask, to lower it while speaking, or any thoughts around that, I guess?
Sorry, my audio cut out for a second, so I just want to make sure that I captured your question correctly. I think the summary is around like whether when people are speaking, if they should take off their masks or not. Is that the
Yep.
base of it, Alder?
Yeah.
I think that when we had orders, that was something that was permitted for people to take off masks to support the ability to be heard more clearly. I think it's something for consideration now. I mean, it's a different environment, and those microphones are right in front of you. So I'm not sure that having a mask on or off would change the ability to hear people in that setting, in the setting of this environment in that room.
That sounds good. Maybe that's something we could test out a little bit when we're doing our testing. I guess just maybe broadly, could you speak to kind of relative value of masking with our current environment?
I mean, we are in a place where there is a lot of COVID circulating. We know that. We know that what we're capturing is largely probably underreported of what people are experiencing, given the prevalence of home testing. And there's still no doubt that masks are important, we don't use this language anymore, or as much anymore. We still use the language non-pharmaceutical intervention, right? We know that it is a very effective tool in when more people are wearing their masks and reducing the risk of transmission. Following the CDC guidelines, we are in a medium risk environment right now, according to those community levels. So our message as a health department is really focusing on mask wearing for folks who are immunocompromised and at high risk of disease. That doesn't mean that other folks shouldn't consider that as a way to reduce the risk of illness.
Great, thank you.
Alder Conklin.
Thank you, President Furman. I guess my question is for the public. Are we having, spaced out between the public? Are there limits to the number of public members that can attend? How is that set up?
Alder, I don't believe there is anything decided on that. I think that's what we're trying to do today is really try to, get a feel for that. I know there was some prep work done back in the day when we had thought earlier about going back. I don't know if Karen has anything to share about that, about, what some of the thoughts were on spacing. I think we can talk about spacing in the audience. We could also talk about an overflow room if that's something that we think is appropriate. But I'm curious, Karen, what things were talked about in the past?
When it comes to the public, we had discussed, and in fact, the tape even went up right before COVID, before everything shut down in 2020. We had separated, we had kind of marked off every other seat in the gallery. But when we were talking about going back, we were actually talking about not having anyone in the room itself, but rather have some overflow rooms with masks and sanitizer and so on. And then when it was your turn to speak as a member of the public, you would come up, go into the room, speak, and then return to the overflow rooms. And the overflow rooms would have screens. That was the thought. We hadn't obviously tried it out in real life, but.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so, I think that's probably still a good idea to limit public coming in, I think that's something that we definitely should be addressing. And then two, I think we're at a medium right now, and I think that's safe to do either in person or virtual. But I think once it goes high or extreme or anything over that, we should definitely just be automatically virtual. Like there should be no question about it. If, they say the levels are too high, then automatically we have that set already to coincide with public health, is my opinion.
Sure. So, Alder Conklin, I think, I guess your suggestion to be not to allow public in the room at all, or spacing of the public?
I like the idea of having them in the overflow room, and then they come out to speak to us when it's their time, and then they go back masked up instead of just sitting in the chambers where they usually sat, until I think it comes down to low at least.
Okay. Yeah. I think one of the things obviously to be concerned about the overflow room is probably the staffing requirements for that. So I think we we'll need to figure that out and figure out what that possibly looks like. I'd like to ask Janelle, related to what Alder Conklin was talking about, levels. I'm totally putting you on the spot, but hopefully you've done this enough. Can you tell us a little bit difference about what low, medium, high means? I don't know if there are any other levels besides low, medium, high, but I think it's a case count number, right?
It's a combination. The levels are a combination of case activity as well as hospital capacity. And so what would move us to high would move us as a region. And when you look at hospital capacity, one of the perhaps challenging elements of that, but the reality of how we respond as a healthcare system, is that it's a regional metric. And so it's not just for Dane County, but it's a metric that represents the region who receives care around here. And so we have a lot of case activity, but that is not translated into an excessive burden on our healthcare system. We would have to be in excess of 10 per 100,000 individuals hospitalized with COVID, or 10% bed use or higher. Currently, I didn't pull up this slide for today, sorry. We are at, I believe, 3.8% bed utilization today. And 8.6 per 100,000 hospitalizations. So that's been kind of bubbling in this range as we're seeing case activity start to decrease right now.
So to be clear, the next level would be high. I think you gave us an idea of how do we hit that. Is there there's no levels above that, right?
No, there's low, medium, and high.
And what would it take to get us back from this medium? We're at medium now. What would it take for us to go to low?
I'd have to pull up. Sorry,
okay.
Some of these
no,
data
that's okay.
points are not as present in my brain. At
no,
the
that's okay. We've got a bunch of other alders in the queue, so I'll come back to you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And hold on. And what would it take to go back to high? Could we get that answer as well?
We have not hit high yet. And so under these new community levels, it's that were released in March, early April. It's when they started to build metrics that represented the burden on hospital capacity. And so we moved beyond where we had previously been kind of at a purely case count related and percent positivity to help understand the burden at the community level. So that's a lesser metric. Or not just the sole metric. There's never, and let me be clear, I know this has been one of the hard things. There's never just been one metric that we've looked at, but now that CDC kind of built this new framework, it includes that hospital burden as a way that they were able to do some analysis that said, once we start seeing this type of case activity, we anticipate that at this 3-week mark, that's when we would start to see a burden that translate into a different burden on hospital usage. And so that would have to shift us from, we're at currently at 8.6 per 100,000. So there's two metrics that they utilize in that move towards high. And you don't have to have both of those change, only one might change. And so that would be that's the hospital admissions per 100,000. We're currently, as of today, at 8.6. If it were 10 or higher, that would move us to high. Similarly, the other metric is COVID inpatient bed utilization. We are at 3.8%. And that would have to be 10% or higher as well. So we have been in this about 6 to 8 range per 100,000, for a good number of weeks now, and we have not seen that go up to that 10 per 100,000. I'm really hopeful that we won't, because we're starting to see case activity decrease. And then the other thing, I don't know this, but I would just offer, you didn't ask this question, but just for consideration, this was all developed based on early Omicron Delta data. And so we're now at a place where we could see those metrics change in the future, again, given what we know to be true about reinfection and increasing vaccination coverage and boosters and so on. So I share that for things that you might to offer, things could change again in how we look at data and understand kind of burden of COVID in the community. And that could be one way that could change in the future. Not relevant for now, but just as you think about where things may evolve in practices.
Alder Conklin, does that help for now? Thank you, Janelle. I think one of the things that we have talked about here is that we're going to have to continue to iterate just like everybody else with all of this. So appreciate that caveat. Alder Heck.
Thanks. I guess I have a couple of questions. First, I believe that we should, as much as possible, have the same set of rules, I'll call them, for the public, for alders and staff whenever possible. I realize the public doesn't work for the city or the county, but I if possible, I guess I'm interested in knowing, can we tell the public what to do if it's different than what anybody in CCB is required to do. If we wanted to have the public hop on one foot when they come to council meetings, could we do that? I guess I'm wondering what we can do that's beyond the current situation in CCB.
Yeah, I think that's a good question for Attorney Haas. Attorney Haas, can we have people hop on one foot if they attend a council meeting?
That is a new one. I have to confess, I've never heard that question. Obviously, under the Open Meetings Law, the main obligation is that the public needs to have an opportunity to observe the meeting. And so when you're talking about, masking and things like that, I think that all depends upon, what justification we would have under the public health guidance. But beyond, whatever is necessary to protect, sort of public health and safety, we probably can't go beyond that and telling them how they have to behave. Besides, protecting the decorum of the meeting.
Well, maybe Janelle knows the answer to this, but right now I believe there are no restrictions whatsoever on people coming into CCB. There's a lot of advice, but there are no restrictions. And we don't, do we still have testing requirements? Otherwise you have to have PCR tests for city staff and county staff, and which is essentially what we have in our Alder policy.
I don't believe so, no. Let me answer. You asked a couple questions. There are no requirements for masking for people to come into the buildings right now. And I am tracking both sets of policies, but as a county employee, I don't think either unit has the same testing requirements any longer.
Yeah, so I guess I wonder, can we require things of the public that aren't required of ourselves? I don't know.
Yeah, so as much as I loved your question about hopping on one foot and appreciated the framing of that, I think I want to probably ask Attorney Haas if we could be a little bit more direct in the sense of could we require masks? And then going down the slope of could we require vaccinations? Could we require testing if we wanted to, as long as in that room? So I think those policies in particular, would that be something that we would be allowed to do in 201?
I think I don't know if I can give a definite answer. I think that the more restrictive we are, probably obviously complaining or resisting, and I think the more restrictive or the more justification we would need to show that it's necessary. But obviously we've been virtual, and the public has only had the opportunity to virtually. So as long as there's still an opportunity for the public to observe the meeting, I think it's something we probably have to take a closer look at.
Thank you, Attorney Haas. Alder Heck, does that help?
Somewhat. I'll mull it over. Thanks.
Thank you. Alder Paulson, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question, and then I think more of a question that's a comment. So my question is, did we make any decisions about is staff going to be present? Because it affects my thinking a little bit based on how full the room is going to be. And if the back couple rows are full of all the staff, that changes a little bit of sort of what I think the risk profile of the room is, given the size of the room.
Yeah, so we have a later slide that talks about that. But from our last discussion at our 6-2 meeting, I think the thought was that staff would be able to participate virtually at the discretion of the mayor. We'd like to be informed of which staff will be in person. In our leadership meeting with the mayor on Friday, there was an indication that the mayor's preference would be for most staff to be virtual. If there was a very big project, maybe like the metro redesign that we had the other day, it might be helpful to actually have staff there. But I do think we would be defaulting to most of the staff not being there, with the exception of things like our city attorney, the clerk, our chief of staff. But I wouldn't expect the room to be filled with staff if that's what you're asking.
Yes, that is what I'm asking, because the crowds can vary issue by issue and night by night, but staff in the past showed up even if they were never called on and had to sit there. So I always felt bad, but I always appreciated their dedication. My second question is a little bit about if the room has been reconfigured. There used to be two microphones on either side of the dais, and most nights we only used the one on the mayor's right side. But some nights, if it was busy, especially if it was busy because we could load balance between the two sides, we would use both of them. And I wonder if that's still present, and I'll explain my rationale. I would like to potentially consider using maybe one of those as a way for folks who want to sort of come in and go out right away, who may, for whatever reason, not be comfortable being in the room. And so maybe a microphone that they could get to without needing to be near a lot of other people. So we maybe not seat people on one side, but we might leave the microphone available so folks can come in from an overflow room, speak, and then immediately leave. But then we could leave perhaps the other side as a general seating and run as we normally do. Because I think it's important to preserve the ability for all members of the public to be able to address the body in person. If that's what they think that's going to be the most persuasive. I don't want to rule anything out, but I'm also concerned about people who may not be comfortable physically being present yet. And so doing our best to find an accommodation that can work with them. And I think if we've got the two separate spaces, we may want to be able to use that to work in our favor. And then the final, just kind of last comment is that I saw the headline in the news alerts that the vaccine has earned approval for everyone 6 months and up. And I know it's got a couple of hops to go through, and then it will take a couple of weeks for kids to actually get it and then for immunity to come in. But I think it's going to change the calculus for a lot of folks in the community about, is it safe for me to participate in other activities? Now knowing that a big percentage of folks who didn't have the ability to be protected by the vaccination have it. So I think that will change maybe some folks being willing to come out and do things in public. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's helpful. One of the things I think to note too, there is a possibility with staff, if we would have them in person, that they may not be in person until their item is up. They have the ability to go to their office, watch it virtually, and come in. We've had that be the case when we're in person, even in the past. You would have staff that would, watch the meeting from their office and then come. So I just wanted to at least add that one little other thing about staff as a possibility. When I was in the room yesterday, it was set up with both of those speaking areas. And so I do think that the room still has that ability to do that, and that is an option. Those areas look like they move a little bit too. I don't think there's a lot of motion there, but it does look like we would have the ability to pick a side or limit it to a side. Alder Bennett, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, cool. Well, Alder Paulson beat me to it about maybe shifting aside. I guess since public health is here, I really want to choose my words wisely because I'm coming at this as like a privileged point of view as someone that is a young person and doesn't have to worry for myself personally about too much with getting COVID and stuff, but knowing I have high-risk family members and stuff. Anyways, I just really wonder if it's right for us to put so many constraints on the public, kind of what Patrick was mentioning. And I think kind of what Alder Paulson was getting to. I just mean, I've in the past, few months since the mask mandate was ended and everything. I mean, I've personally been attending class in person for the past year. I've gone to student council meetings. I'm on like the committee and student council, which are all in person. Some people wear masks, some people don't. And still the UW Madison COVID positive rates are less than 1%. And it is because most people are vaccinated and all this other stuff. So I guess I'm curious to know, like, is it really right for us to put so many constraints? Is there a really high risk of people getting COVID? And if people are afraid of getting COVID, should we just encourage them to stay at home or, do the hybrid thing or go into the separate room? I guess, I don't know, but I'm weary about putting so many constraints when I've seen that without constraints, there isn't that much high of positive rates. But I don't know if that's what the data shows. So you can turn that into a question.
So Alder Bennett, if that's a question, can you be specific who you're asking it of and then restate it as a question?
I guess I'm wondering, like, how is it really going to cause a lot of risk of spreading COVID being in person, or like what is the efficacy of us ethicalness? I don't know, of us giving restraints to people in this time where there aren't many restraints.
Is that a question for me, Alderman? I'm not quite sure who you're asking that question to. I thought I heard public health, but I'm not exactly certain about your question. If you're asking a question about the risk of illness, there is a lot of illness that's circulating right now, but I'm going to defer on the question around where I hear you're pondering around what you're asking people to do, because I don't think y'all have decided what you're going to do yet. Is that fair?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I will say, Alder Bennett, one of the things that I think we need, whatever we end up doing, we need to try to, do it based on something. I think that's what we probably heard from Attorney Haas. The CDC and public health have guidelines for how to deal with the different levels. And I think that hopefully will be a guiding force for us, as saying, here are the precautions people should take. This stuff keeps changing, obviously. So we have to decide something and go based on the information we know. There's no easy answer. Also, I guess what I'm trying to tell you as well. I wish there was.
I mean, I feel like it's kind of one of those things that's a question for us to ponder with, is if we really want to put in our own restraints, or if we should just put in guidelines and be like, here's what you should do. You don't, do anything else at your own risk. Don't wear a mask at your own risk. Sit next to people at your own risk. But I don't think that we should force people, is what I'm trying to say, to do that.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Alder Fair.
Thank you, President Furman. Alder Heck beat me to my question. So I think I'll just maybe make some comments, and I might have to get off the discussion because I have some visitors that are here. I guess I'm a sort of along the lines of Juliana, or Alder Bennett, sorry. I think that if you look around, and we all know this, but we're just about the only institution that I know of that is virtual, all virtual, And if you look around the community, of course, there's concerts and crowded restaurants and huge sporting events. And I've met with several of you in a coffee shop and going to meet with others in a coffee shop sitting right across from each other in crowded places. So I think I think it's time that we follow. We're not leading at this point. We're following the community. And I think making restrictions, jumping through a bunch of hoops. I mean, I think I agree that we can recommend, we can put out, recommendations and things like that. But, once we start trying to do so many different things, for instance, I was thinking about, and Alder Paulson, I think you're thinking outside the box, and I like how you think, except then I was thinking, so if we don't have that mic and it's a very busy night, let's say, and so we try not to put people on one side, then they go into a room where they're going to be I would assume around other people and pretty crowded. So it's like, at some point, like we won't have, we are, there's mitigated risk that we're going to have to take no matter what where we come down. So, I just think if we're going to lean anyway, we should lean towards not restricting or mandating any kind of masks or distance. And of course, people can do whatever they need to do for their own personal safety and what they want to do to help others. That's of course up to them. So I would just encourage us that we, I get back, yes, but also get back without restrictions, and we follow what the rest of the community and really the rest of the country is doing. And it might give us a little bit of credibility as well. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Alder Fair. Alder Foster.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I agree with most of what I've been hearing recently. I actually think we shouldn't even go into the recommendations side of it, and mostly, honestly, because if we're going to do anything as a council, that means the only way we can do that is when we're in session. And so the only way we could ever update or change even recommendations are going to be at a council meeting, under suspension of the rules, assumedly, and it's just not even close to nimble enough to deal with the changes. So I just think, for me, this seems super straightforward. We've got public health guidance, and we have guidance for the CCB building, and I don't think we should go beyond that. I think we should just leave it at that. And the fact that it sounds like everyone minus mayor, council president, clerk, and attorney can choose to be virtual, whether that's members of the public staff or alders, gives a lot of flexibility, and I think eases the any rationale for trying to come up with additional or separate or different restrictions or even guidelines. So for me, I would say let's just leave this one alone and let whatever the public health guidance, let that rule and be nimble.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Paulson.
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with several of the previous alders here, and then I actually am comfortable setting slightly higher standards at the council meeting for the council chambers, because I think for people who want to access it, I think we need to think about how we make that an accessible space for everyone. And I think in this particular case, we may err a little bit more on the side of being a little bit more cautious about what we ask people to do with respect to other folks. So, if you want to go to a coffee shop and not wear a mask, I think that's fine. That's an individual risk sort of thing. There are certain obligations. There are certain things that you can only do by going to the council meeting, or maybe only effectively do by going to the council meeting. So I think it's a little higher burden, and so I think it's okay if we err on the side of saying we're going to ask more of the attendees who are attending this in person to take a couple of extra steps in the interest of protecting other people who may be here. Not because they want to be, because they feel that they have to be, even if it's out of step with what the rest of the community does.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Conklin.
Thank you, President Furman. I agree with my colleagues to a point. We need to make it accessible. We want to get the public back in the building, but honestly, I think we do have to have a higher expectation. I think it's important. I'm speaking for myself. I have a young child who cannot be vaccinated yet, regardless if they approve it. You know what I'm saying? Stop. Sorry. Regardless if they approve it for 6 months old, you know what I'm saying? There's not people just going to be, I'm not going to be giving my baby up to try a vaccine. You know what I'm saying? So I think we do need to set standards. I think masks still should be worn in the building, in the chambers. And I think we do need to have a little bit higher expectation for folks who are trying to access the building and the council meetings, in my opinion. So thank you.
Thank you, Alder Conklin. Alder Evers.
Thanks. Thank you, President. Greeting you all from Hoyt Sherman Place in Des Moines. So this shows the efficacy of a virtual meeting. I can be out of town and join in. My thoughts are that, well, first of all, I guess this is a question for Janelle, and pardon me, I had to step out for a moment and miss part of the meeting. I saw that Dane County Board Supervisor Chuck Erickson sent out an email that I saw indicating that the county board was going to hold a hybrid meeting. And I'm wondering, Janelle, if you're aware, or if it's called, or aware of what stipulations they have in place. Maybe, but will they have any restrictions whatsoever?
Alder, I am only tracking right now, and this could be my apologies in not having dug through their protocols, but the protocols that they put forward for their in-person meeting that I am anticipating are translating for the same practices when they are holding hybrid. And so in that, I think Alder Furman, I think I saw you share that previously, or it was in maybe it was just in my our email exchange on this, but the supervisors were spread apart to the greatest extent possible when they were in. So maybe Alder Evers, are you asking about their in-person practices? They did not
I'm asking what their plan is at CCB. I know what they did. I see what they did at Alliant Energy Center, but they're going relatively near future, from what I understand, a meeting at CCB. And I'm curious if anyone knows how they plan to hold that meeting.
I don't have those specific protocols in front of me. I apologize.
Well, I'll say this, and here's my comment. I don't think it's reasonable for us to expect anything more than what our colleagues at the county board would have in terms of their meeting protocol. Secondly, I think the value of the hybrid meeting in this instance, at least in this interim, would be if there's an alder who, for a particular circumstance, not because they want to stay home and eat dinner at home and be with their dog like I might want to do, but if they have a health for themselves or a family member, that they would have the right to engage the meeting virtually as opposed to in person. But I don't think we can impose upon the public any standards that are different from what our colleagues at the county board are doing. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. I appreciate that. Yeah, I brought up a moment ago when we were talking, I'm going to bring it up again, the public health recommendations for gatherings. That's also based on the CDC recommendations. I just want to kind of point out some of the things that, these cases that are these, different scenarios are, I think, well addressed in this and in the COVID gathering recommendations. And so I want to kind of specifically point out, I mean, they point out here, if you're of high risk, that you should be wearing a mask, and, testing and having a plan, considering a mask when indoors, staying up to date with your vaccines, proper ventilation. If you don't feel well, you stay home. I'm inclined to suggest that we follow, this. I'm going to. I'll just say this, and I have continued to wear a mask. Everybody who knows me knows that when I'm, even outdoors in larger crowds, I'm continuing to wear a mask. When I go to CCB now and meet with staff, it makes me comfortable to wear a mask. And the way I look at it is the mask protects me from whatever's going around. And obviously, if I have something and don't know, it's protecting others. And I really do think that the public health Madison-Dane County recommendations kind of align with that idea. If you're uncomfortable, you should be wearing a mask. And if it goes high, that they're suggesting everybody wear a mask if you're in an indoor gathering. I'm inclined, at least from my point of view, my opinion, that's what we should look at. I think the big question mark would be for me is just the spacing, if any, in the public. And what we do about overflow rooms, knowing that those are not going to be easy to set up, and we certainly don't want to have to set up, multiple. So I think I want to throw out the suggestion that we follow we can certainly look at what the county is doing, but we follow the recommendations that public health and CDC have put out, and stick to that. Alder Evers.
Yeah, and I guess one would assume and hope anyways that the county board is following public health guidelines. But when you're saying that these public health guidelines are not mandates, are you suggesting then that we should not mandate of those in attendance that they wear a mask or that they engage in social distance, that we should suggest it? Because I guess I am of the opinion that it's not reasonable for us to make requirements that exceed the current public health stipulations, suggestions, standards, et cetera.
Yeah, I'm suggesting we stick to the standards, the recommendations. I personally don't have an issue with suggesting people put on masks, but I don't think I'm comfortable based on what's being proposed by the CDC and public health of saying if we're in medium that you have to wear a mask, otherwise we're not going to let you in the room. I think I'm of the camp based on what I've read, and I don't want to put Janelle on the spot with this, but that if you're concerned, a mask protects you. Preferably, I will likely be wearing a mask for a while in chambers. But yeah, I think sticking to what the CDC / public health recommendations, and then I'm fine with adding a caveat of suggested, but not requiring. And again, that's just my opinion. Alder Heck. Alder. I'm sorry, Alder Evers. Did you want to?
No, that's all. I just wanted to clarify that that you see these as voluntary, not as mandates. Thank you.
Thanks. Alder Heck.
President Furman, just a quick question for you. Were you speaking about the public in what you just said, or in all attendees?
In my opinion, I think I was speaking about all attendees. That again, just my opinion.
Okay, I guess I was going to say that we already have a more stringent Alder policy related to testing than what we would have for other attendees. And so it wouldn't be that out of the ordinary to require alders to wear masks, and perhaps even staff, which is something I would consider perhaps, but I do think that the public is a little trickier. And but I think I'd even be open to having the public wear masks if we could, but it's not that big of a deal for me. I guess one other question is I want to know more about, and maybe we talked about this the last time, I can't remember, about the improved ventilation in 201.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anybody, so thank you, Alder. I'm not sure if anybody here, I'm probably going to call on, I'm not convinced she knows, but since Sarah Edgerton is here, Sarah, any chance do you know what possible improvements they may have made in 201 related to ventilation?
I wear many hats, but facilities manager is not one of them. So no, I am not able to answer that one for you. Sorry. But I can find out if you would like.
Yeah, you were the closest person I had here, so
I totally
thank you for letting
get
me
it.
pick on you.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Paulson.
Thanks. Sorry for speaking the third time. I just have a procedural question. What's the structure of the recommendations that you're going to make back to council? And sort of my request for that would be if what the CCEC recommends back is that we take a very relaxed sort of in line with the community guidelines for recommendations. Could you also prepare, could someone from public health also prepare a version that's written for if we took a more conservative approach than what the community guidelines are, so that if we vote on recommendations at the council, we have one that's actually written by science and we're not trying to write one on the floor.
Alder,
even if that's not included in the recommendation, if there was someone who could prepare one, that would be an option for us to discuss at full council.
Sure, Alder. I will say I don't think we've decided how we're going to do this exactly. I'm a little bit fearful of doing a resolution related to this, but I'm open to it. My concern with a resolution is our ability to just iterate. I also do believe, though, that at some point this is an Alder, an entire body decision, so we have to figure it out. I guess as we get further in this conversation, we're going to figure that out. And if you wanted to see something specific, I wasn't planning on asking public health to prepare anything, but you and I could, if you have other suggestions, we can certainly offline loop in public health on whether or not they had anything they wanted to, assist with that. I do think, they have, from a science perspective, released their gathering requirements, or their gathering recommendations, to be more clear. They're not requirements. So I do think from a science perspective, we certainly have, that based on what our classification is. It really comes down to, everybody has different risk tolerances. And that's, what we all really learned during COVID is we have different comfort levels and risk tolerances. And, how we address that as a body and a group is a work in progress. Alder Fair.
I guess I have a question maybe for Karen and council staff. If we could look around the state and the country to see if there's any other municipality governing body that does have higher standards for their meetings for the public than what CDC, as President Furman was just talking about, what CDC and all the public health departments around the country, I assume, who follow CDC's guidelines have out. So I don't know of any, but I wonder if there is a model out there where, they require staff, require their members, or require the public to, for instance, wear masks or social distance or whatever. So I don't know if that's something that maybe an intern could look into, or Karen, you could find out for us at some point. Just a thought.
I appreciate that, Alder Fair. Sarah, I know you spoke with, and you don't even have to name the community. I know you spoke with another community that was figuring out some hybrid stuff, and you guys got some tips from there. Did you guys talk about COVID-19 protocols and any of those discussions that might be helpful for this? Now I'm asking you to put on your scientist hat.
Sure, I can actually tell you who it was. It was the city of Boise, Idaho. And so they had to follow the state guidelines because that was what the county was doing, I believe. And I would say that maybe those are a little bit more relaxed than ours.
So they didn't do anything different. They followed the local guidelines that they were supposed to follow. Okay, thank you.
That's how everything was handled.
And that's just one example, but that's helpful. Thank you. Alder Fair, anything else? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks. Just real quickly, I mean, two things. One, I don't think I've personally been in a building that has required a mask for a very long time now. There may be some out there. I do think this would be extraordinary for us to go down that path. Probably the more important thing is if anyone is interested in putting such a thing forward, and if the council ultimately does want to pass such a thing, I think it's critical that we also then think through all of the following steps, which is who's going to enforce it and what's going to happen when somebody refuses, because there's no question in my mind that we're going to waste a whole bunch of time on somebody that shows up at a meeting says, I'm not wearing a mask, and we need to be prepared to deal with it. I think it's a huge waste of time to go down that path and to get all that figured out. But if we are going to go down there, I think we need to think through all of that ahead of time as well. And I'd rather not do that tonight. But if we're thinking that we're going to have the council choose to set up a requirement that doesn't exist anywhere else that I'm aware of in the community, we should be really thoughtful about it, because it's going to cause, this will be the place where we're going to have confrontation around it.
Appreciate that, Alder Foster. Any other questions, thoughts on this? I mean, I think, there are two it sounds like two different opinions emerging, which is, following the CDC/public health, and then possibly coming up with a little bit higher level and what that actually looks like. I will remind everybody, we do have another meeting where we can talk about this before our currently scheduled hybrid suggestion. And I'm pretty comfortable that we'll figure something out. With suggestions on both of those paths based on tonight's discussion. Vice President Curry.
Thank you. I just wanted to listen to what everyone else said, but kind of share my perspective. I think equipping or setting up the hybrid situation is not just for, city staff and us, but also in consideration of the public. And I feel that in lieu of not trying to enact restrictions that aren't replicated in the community anywhere or expected anywhere else, could be advising folks to appear via hybrid if they have any concerns about, contracting or being around people who are ill. Some of the requirements there, I think, should be similar to like schools or larger settings of if you're sick, if you've been exposed, some of those guidelines, versus you have to wear a mask or present proof of vaccination. So I just wanted to kind of add that.
Thank you, Vice President Curry. I think we've heard a lot on this. I think we definitely have some direction on giving people choices to make a decision going forward. So I don't think we're going to come to a consensus necessarily this evening, but I think we've got, in my opinion, we've got what we need. I can't promise that we're going to have research done on different municipalities throughout the country on what they're doing between now and the Tuesday or even the 29th. But I know, we'll certainly see what we can figure out. But I think it's clear that there are two different opinions on this, and the council will have to make a decision. But we'll make sure that we get that presented well for people to decide what we want to do there. And I agree with Alder Foster. If we're going with different requirements, we do need to think about how we're going to enforce that. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but we definitely need to be intentional about that. Okay, Janelle, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Really, really appreciate your time. The stuff is not easy, and you definitely made it easier, so thank you. All right, I'm gonna resume our PowerPoint presentation, and we'll go ahead and talk about some of the other things that that's still to be decided, and a little bit of summary of what we have talked about so far. So go ahead and share that. All right, so we've got the guidelines. All right, so we've talked about the protocols. I think I have some direction on being able to present some options going forward. We'll let people know that there was a staff mock meeting yesterday. I crashed it and watched, but the tech team is doing a fantastic job of figuring out how to use the new technology, and I'm really looking forward to people seeing that and giving feedback. As the slide says, there was I call it successful. I don't know if they'll use that same phrase, because I know they were going to go back and meet, figure out what went right and what went wrong. There will be 2 additional mock council meetings, including one that we are going to notice and invite all alders to, which is on Thursday, June 30th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. We're hoping to get as much participation by alders as possible at that meeting, and there will be absolutely a virtual component if somebody wishes to participate in the meeting in way and wants to help test it. I'm pretty sure we'll be able to get some staff members to help with the virtual component as well, so you guys can see what that experience looks like. If you look at the pictures, I'm going back to this previous slide, I do want to note the more people that participate virtually, the harder it is to see them. So the thought is to use this, I believe it's called the gallery view, to show in this picture, which is not the easiest picture to see, but I'll just let you know there are all the people that don't have their video on or don't display. So there are other people that are connected to the meeting, and if they have their video turned off, they don't show up on the screen. And then in the center, the top center, you can see, or at least that's where it's laid out here, they actually have the what's called the broadcast feed. So you can actually see what's on City Channel, and that will show you the speaker speaking. And so in this instance, it looks like it's actually the chair talking, and you can see that's the video that people at home on City Channel are saying, or people that are watching it as members of the public on Zoom. I'm eager for people to see what that looks like, and for those that haven't been in the room in the past, to try the room, and that is scheduled for Thursday, June 30th. There'll be more info sent out about that, including it noticed, since we'll have likely a quorum of the council. But that will give everybody an opportunity who are interested in seeing that before. I will say that we're also planning on doing some pre-meeting training session before the first hybrid meeting. If that is on the 12th, it would be on the 12th, and people can show up a little bit earlier and make sure that they're comfortable with everything from how to use the microphone to how to adjust their seat, and all the different mechanics of being in person for the first time for some, and then also the hybrid component. So any questions about the mock meeting or 201 at this point, besides the air quality thing that we'll try to find out what, if any, upgrades were made with that? All right, not seeing any, I'll move on. Just as a reminder, when we're talking about the hybrid stuff, we've got the participants of chair, meeting clerk, members of the body, city staff, members of the public. Not going to go into the Zoom stuff again. Meeting registration, we'll continue. We're trying to online, and we're trying to figure out how to best do the in-person stuff, including possibly a kiosk. But at the very least, there will be an option for people who don't have a smartphone at our meeting to sign up to do public comment, and we'll continue to have public comment registration. Starting once the agenda comes out, which is obviously a huge improvement compared to what we had previously when we were in person with those paper forms and people having to come to sign up and only be able to speak in person. Alder Figueroa Cole, go ahead.
Will the registrant form be updated to capture if the registrant is in person versus hybrid mode?
Right now, the current thinking is no, to give people the flexibility. I think there are going to be instances where somebody may sign up and say they're going to be in person, but end up wanting to be virtual, and or vice versa. But I think right now the thought is that form would not be modified.
And there's nothing else that can be done on the back end to capture that data. Like
I mean, if we can, yeah, I guess the struggle is if we capture it, what do we do if somebody changes their mind?
No, I mean, like like live when it's happening. Like, is there a mechanism to know that to assess later that these calls came through virtual versus someone at the microphone in the room?
You mean somebody can go back and modify their registration? Is that what you're asking specifically?
Well, not necessarily the registration, but some kind of data, some kind of step. I don't know, a checkbox or something. I don't know.
We could talk about this more offline. I think the idea is try to be flexible for the public, knowing that life happens and people may change what they signed up and said. But I can loop you. You and I can talk about this more and try to figure out if there are other use cases or other ways of handling it that are reasonable. And we certainly don't want to ask the web team to spend a ton of time trying to tweak this.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that needs to be necessarily on the registration, but we should consider trying to track that information. I mean, as part of changing these processes, we should be able to go back a few months from now and see how effective the change has been.
Yeah,
and that
appreciate
would be kind of a good data set. Thank
you. Any other thoughts about meeting registration before I move on? All right, not seeing any. Quick summary of the discussion about that we had, based on the notes that were provided and my recollection. I think there was pretty strong agreement that the chair, the mayor, the president, VP, clerks, council, chief of staff, and city attorney should be in person. Any new questions, thoughts about that, or we're still all pretty in agreement with that? All right, this was brought up before. City staff, staff should be able to participate virtually at the discretion of the mayor. Was the comments. Alders would like to know if staff will be present. I didn't put it on the slide, but it sounds like the default would be staff would likely be virtual, but on bigger projects it would be possibly makes sense for them to be in the room when that's happening. And my example would be something like the metro redesign. It could be helpful to have the staff actually there. Any new questions, ideas, discussions, thoughts on that? All right, Alder Bennett, go ahead.
I think I said this in the last meeting, but I'm gonna say it again. And maybe I should connect with you offline to see how we can better this. But I think it's especially important with the hybrid format for alders to take things off of the consent or take things off the consent agenda. So if staff members are needed, they know that they need to be there and they can make plans whether they want to show up virtually or in person. I'm just putting it out there again. It's because there's been a lot of instances over this past year of taking things off of the consent agenda and then the right staff members aren't there. Or they are there and then they have to stay later. So what if a staff member is there in the meeting room in person and they thought they would be able to leave early and then they realize, well, shoot, I could have gone home, but now I'm stuck here in the council chamber when I could have been doing this at home because it wasn't taken off the consent agenda prior to the meeting.
Alder, I appreciate that. I will say that there's a lot of your colleagues are starting to contribute ideas on making the meeting shorter, and I think discussion of the consent agenda and the time that people can still sign up to talk about items is part of that discussion. So for example, I will just say a member of the public can take an item off the consent agenda before the consent agenda is present. So even if we ask alders to take something off the consent agenda by a certain period of time, right now our rules allow people to take things off of the consent agenda, members of the public, up until we take up the consent agenda. So my point would be this is probably going to be part of a much bigger discussion about our council format and ways to streamline it, but I absolutely agree with your concerns. We just have to figure out a way that makes sense for everybody to possibly fix that.
Yeah, do you have a response to that's a situation where a staff member's in person, they thought they would be leaving at 9 p.m., but then an item that they didn't know was going to be taken off the consent agenda was taken off. Now they had to wait around in person until, I don't know, midnight when they could have just gone home.
Yeah, I don't think that's a discussion for this at this point. So I think when we're talking about how we improve our meeting lengths, we'll definitely get into that. I promise you. I think that's a big aspect of our late meetings and trying to make sure staff is comfortable, et cetera.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. All right. So move on to the next one. Members of the public. I don't think that I don't know if anybody has anything new here, but meeting registration, as we talked about, continue to be online. Public can be in person or virtual. Comments from the last one, we did go into a little bit about material being able to be possibly given, submitted electronically ahead of the time. That material should be submitted ahead of time electronically, and that registrants could bring in a physical copy. I think overall we need to have a much longer discussion about creating guidelines and standards for stuff that came up yesterday in the hybrid test with staff is, who's responsible for that? Are we going to have, right now we've been getting away with, however, it's kind of been working. I think departments have been doing it, but what makes sense long term? I think there's strong agreement on trying to figure out what's going on with the virtual registration video. I don't want that to clog up this discussion at this time, but know that that's a priority for me to figure out with this group. And so we'll bring back up that item that was at CCEC in the past and trying to talk about different ways of handling that and dealing with the pros and cons. Any new questions, ideas, discussions on the members of the public participating in the meeting? All right, not seeing any, I appreciate that. And so we'll move on to really where some of the outstanding questions were related to hybrid meetings, which is members of the body, which is alders. The summary that I'm including here from the comments what we heard on at our last meeting was that there's a belief that we should keep the council quorum at the same, which is 14 alders, and count it from alders in the room and joining virtually. It sounded like I've heard from people at this meeting, our last meeting, as well as people that came up to me, alders that came up to me individually, saying that there is a strong desire for people to, or the default to be in person. And there's certainly a strong desire to have at least 14 alders in person, especially for the first few meetings. I guess there's a hope that there'd only be rare exceptions when people weren't in person. And then, there was some comment on making sure that the minutes indicate whether alders attend in person or virtual. I don't know how much more we want to get into the quorum stuff. I will say, we should be playing it by ear how this stuff works. I think for functionality of the body, as well as culture, as well as even safety of staff and the members that are there, we really should be trying to have as many people in person as possible. But I for now think the suggestion of what I heard at our last meeting is to see how things go and just to try to encourage that behavior. Any thoughts before I move on to the items not discussed? If anybody wants to make any comments about my summary or anything I may have added. Not seeing any. So I think the big thing to obviously unless people have other things that they want to discuss about this, but I think how the queue will work in person and virtual meetings, and use of Zoom in person by members of the body. I think that's the remaining thought. The room, the CCB 201 room has new microphones that do allow alders to press a button and show up in a queue. To be able to, for the chair to be able to see that. The questions or the concerns about that queue is that if you're virtual, you're going to have to raise your hand. You won't have access to that system. I've had an alder point out the usefulness of being able to see the queue. I do know there have been times during council discussion that I see a fellow committee member of a committee that I'm on has their hand up, and I know right away that they voted the same way I did at the committee, and they'll likely say what I'm going to say, so I won't put my hand up. But I have questions or thoughts on how we should deal with the queue. I think the thought by IT, or at least the thought by how the room is designed, is that there would be an in-person queue and a virtual queue, and the chair would just have to reconcile that. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts about how the queue should work based on some of my leading questions. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I really like the way the queue works virtually. I think it's been a big improvement over what we had in person, and I'm not excited about losing that. I mean, I think what you just mentioned is a good example. I think it's really good for all of us to know if there's 5 or 6 hands up there and not just keep it a mystery. I don't know. I don't know what the options are to, I guess, just bring some visibility to the in-person queue, and ideally to integrate it to not have 2 separate queues. So I don't know if there's any early input from Sarah or from others about, has that been discussed? Are there any potential options for doing something along those lines? But even if it's not ready for sort of the first one, I would really like to get to a place where all members of the body can see what's going on with the queue. I think it's helpful for all of us.
Thank you, Alder Foster. I will say, and I'm not going to speak for Sarah, but I will say, It is my understanding that there is no way to integrate the in-person queue and the Zoom queue, and I think our big option would be having everybody in person also use Zoom and raise their hand in Zoom. Based on the experiment yesterday, I will tell you there could be bandwidth issues related to that, but there absolutely will be technology issues related to that. If members turn on their video, they're going to show up on the big screen as well as being in person, and that's going to be a problem. If members turn on their audio, there could be serious feedback issues. I think these are all things that obviously we can fix as they happen, and have somebody who's a little bit more technical on the council help members that didn't realize they did something like that. But I think the bandwidth and then the audio and video feedback issues are a strong concern if we resort to having everybody log into Zoom and use that for the queue. Sarah, I see you turned your video on. Do you want to add anything to that or correct me?
No, I don't disagree at all. I think where we are going to, the bandwidth issue, everybody's going to need to have their camera off, their video off. So if they're sitting in the room and we have Zoom going, it would be so that you can see where the hands are, et cetera, but you wouldn't be able to, have your video on because the monitor that is behind the mayor and the clerk and the attorney would show then all of the members with, yes, thank you, would show all of the members both in the room as well as those who are virtual. And I think that would be very disjointed for having the council that are in person. I'm sorry, my husband, at the same time that I started talking, went to deal with the fact that we have the major storm coming through and was pulling down an umbrella. So I think the other issue here is I don't know what the bandwidth is going to be like because it's going to be at night. And bandwidth is different during the day when we have a whole bunch of people working versus when it's just the council. But we're certainly going to need to test that and see what that's going to look like. And for the integration piece, Alder Foster, no, we won't be able to integrate both Zoom into the Crestron system. So we'll have to think about, are there other creative solutions for how we can show the queue?
Yeah, I guess that was kind of my last question is within that. So let's maybe leave Zoom aside, pretend we're all in person. Mm-hmm. Is there an option to get a display that connects to that, I think you said Crestron system, that at least would be visible for those in the room?
I have no idea. And it was, you and I are pretty much thinking alike on that. So I think that would be a question, but that also would be a question of money, because then that would be another display that we'd be putting in there, and we'd have to figure out how we would get that integrated into that whole system that was just built.
Yeah, if you could just do some follow-up to see if it's even, it's an option or what it would take, it'd be great. I do think as a member of the body, I find it very valuable. I actually felt that before we went into the virtual space, it was a challenge to not have that visibility. So I think if there is a way to develop it, even if it doesn't include integration with Zoom, assuming we end up in some sort of a place where we are preferring mostly to be in person, I think having some visibility around that in the room would be really helpful for all of us.
Yeah, I definitely think we can certainly have these discussions and figure out if there are some solutions and then present them back.
Thank you.
Vice President Curry, go ahead.
Thank you. Can I clarify? Did you say something, Chair, about the use of Zoom by folks who are attending in person?
Yeah. We were, a possible option is for people that are in person that they could load up the Zoom client and join the meeting. But there are all sorts of valid technical concerns, as Sarah pointed out. People, having their video on and then having the more people display up top, and then also audio feedback. But if we had people turn off their audio and turn off their video, they certainly could participate with their hand up in Zoom in person.
Okay, thank you. I'm a visual person, so I can't wait to be there for the mock meeting. For me, I look at being in person or hybrid for the community as being possibly a thing of convenience. And I know in conversations earlier, talking about going back in person, we've discussed things down to should we provide childcare stipends or parking. I'm not sure if it sounds like it'll be difficult, but my preference, I think, would be to prioritize those who have come in person. If they can stay longer, that's their option, but some way to prioritize the folks that have actually come to the meeting versus hybrid, which to me, I think is convenience, but I also may be missing a perspective of how the community makes the decision whether they want to come in person or appear virtually.
Thank you, Vice President Curry. Alder Paulson.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that there is a tornado warning in Dane County, and if you are on your headphones or not near anything that can show weather alerts, do pay attention.
Thank you for that update. Any Alder Figueroa call?
I'm sorry. If I may ask for Vice President Curry to elaborate priority for what are we talking about? I got lost there for a minute. Prioritize people in person for what?
I guess my logic, and if I'm definitely probably missing a piece, my experience would be, I feel like alders are at a higher level of expectation like we have here. The default is that we are there. But for members of the public, obviously I wasn't part of the council before we went virtual, but I look at appearing virtually as being a thing of convenience. I may not want to come all the way down. I may have kids that are at home so I can attend that. Okay, I see you shaking your head. So I think there should be some prioritization from those who take time to come down, considering factors like parking, the meetings happening over meal times, those things. So I was suggesting we prioritize members of the community who appear in person first in terms of a queue.
Oh, got it. Got it. Thank you. Sorry, I missed that little piece there. Thanks.
Other questions, concerns, thoughts? Okay, not seeing any. Do people have thoughts on best way to proceed at this point? Obviously, we've got a mock meeting scheduled for the 30th. We've had some good discussion that mostly surrounding our COVID-19 protocols today and filling in some of the blanks on some of the other stuff. Thoughts on best way to proceed from the body? Foster, go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I guess in the spirit of, I think, how the conversation has gone over the last two meetings, I really think really stressing this is a work in progress. We're gonna do our very thoughtful best, and we all need to be open to tweaking things as we go. It doesn't sound like there's been strong recommendations from this group so far around any requirements or sort of must-dos. So I personally feel comfortable with kind of the summary information as you've shared it out tonight. And I think just simply sharing, maybe a consolidated version of that kind of summary feedback with council. I mean, I think the big decision obviously is our 11 elders on board with moving forward with hybrid on the date. If not, we'll have that debate there. But in terms of, if we do, I think sharing this out, and then if any elders have, any objections to those things or want to propose any specific requirements or changes different than what's been described or what we're planning, that can also happen there. But I would just, I guess, propose leaving it at that and not doing anything more formal from CCEC's perspective.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Figueroa Cole.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I think we need to be nimble and avoid the micromanagement. You know, the urge to micromanage this process. So what you have is good on my view. And then that second part that Foster was talking there about, please, for all of you, be prepared to have a lot of problems at night. And if we don't have any problems, so we celebrate it, but this is a huge integration for all involved. And no matter how much testing and how much effort we put into it, things, just expect things not to work at some level. So that doesn't mean that staff and the people involved didn't put enough work into it. So just appreciate it. That's just the way that these processes go. So just bring your expectations as low as you can and let the process, trust me, if your expectations are low, you're not going to be that disappointed. Just let the process work for you. And I am confident that eventually will be just flawless. Perhaps not the first day, but eventually. So thank you.
Thank you, Alder Figueroa-Cole. I will put together a summary and share it with alders based on what's already been put together, but kind of in an email and a little bit easier to read without having to go through a lot of slides. And I'm sure we will have a discussion about this at 6:21, and certainly can talk about this more at our CCEC meeting in 2 weeks. So with that, I'm going to move on to our next item on the agenda, which is item 72110, Council Office Update, and turn it over to Karen.
Hello, everyone. I have some updates for you. So a couple things. You may have heard that the City County building is now accessible to the public, which also means that you won't need your access card to be able to get up to the 4th floor. So just FYI. And until we have at least one more full-time person in the office, I'm going to leave the close to the public sign up on the council office door for now. And oh, yes, there are 3 Alder parking spots in the CCB garage. And Debbie is happy to show you if you're not sure where to park or what that looks like, and also to talk about additional parking or parking options during council meetings when you come back in person. Please reach out to Debbie for that, and she will help you out. Just a reminder that city offices are closed on Monday for the Juneteenth holiday. Any questions about those things before I move on? Okay. And President Furman had already mentioned that we do have an Alder vaccination test requirements, and all Alders need to submit COVID-19 vaccination documentation. And I'll be sending an email to everyone who we're missing documentation from. So keep your eye out for that. Any questions on that? Cool.
Karen, my only question, since I think everybody knows who if you've done it and you don't hear from Karen tomorrow, assume that you're good. So you may not get an email, but unless you get an email, assume that what you submitted is appropriate.
That's correct. And if you do get an email, please return the required information as soon as you can. Yes, that's correct. Okay, I wanted to do a quick update for the Aspire interns. So we have our 2 Aspire interns are here. Yep, they're here still tonight. They are on board, getting off to a great start. And I provided some information in the sheet that I sent around to everybody before the meeting and attached on Legistar about some of the things that they're up to. And of course, as projects come in, we divvy them up, and they'll be with us till the 20th of July, or they finish up their 320 hours. And we're giving them training on Legistar. They're shadowing meetings. They're also taking some city training. So when I see a city training that looks like something that might be valuable, I send it over their way so that they can take advantage of that opportunity while they're here. And they're hybrid. They're going between spending some time in the physical office and spending some time remote. So you may, if you check in with them, you can find out if they'll be in and you want to say hi or whatever. And I had sent an intro to you all with their bios and pictures and emails. So feel free to reach out to say hello. Alder Conklin, I see your hand up.
Yes, and I heard you say you just sent an update of them, our intern. I mean, I'm just wondering if they're here, can they come on? Can they say hi, introduce themselves, anything?
They're here. Let's
Don't
see.
be shy now, come on.
Ooh.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, I'm like stressed because I have a really bad fear of thunderstorms.
Kahinde, are you here? Can you hear us? She may have stepped away. I will I'll Skype folks and if they and try to get them back. Alder Bennett.
As a point of privilege, I just have to say, I'm so happy to finally have people my age around this council office. And I'm happy that you all have the opportunity. And it's hard being lonely and the only one, that has this experience. So, hi. And you're awesome. And I'm excited to work with you all this time. And I hope everyone here that's on CCEC also goes to meet the interns and hang out with them.
Thank you. Okay, so then I wanted to let you know a little bit about my onboarding, what I've been up to. So as most of you know, I've been reaching out to the alders individually to set up meetings in their district if possible, or otherwise, remote is fine, to sit and just spend some time talking to them, getting your thoughts on all things council office, giving updates, getting some feedback on things I'm working on, and setting up I'm going to be setting up recurring meetings with everybody who's interested. For those of you, there are a couple of you here who we have not had a chance yet to get together. I will absolutely we'll keep working and we'll find a time soon. And I've also been taking, I've signed up for a bunch of city trainings. And that's going to continue through the coming months, including the supervisory trainings, the other types of trainings that are offered. And I will be setting up meetings with department and division heads soon. Of course, I interact with a number of them on a case-by-case basis, but I would like to also just sit down and talk about how to improve the communication between the council and the council office and the various departments and so on. So that's on my list to do. Any questions about that part? Okay, so then maybe the most exciting piece of all of this is the council office hiring status. So FYI, we have they reorganized everything in HR. Bill Wick is our HR liaison now. Tori Larson moved on to another position. And so we've got some updates. The administrative assistant position closed on Monday. Interviews are planned to start on the week of the 27th. So I'm thinking I'm expecting 2 rounds of interviews. And then we have very specific dates that new people can start if they're not already employees of the city. So I am really hoping that by the mid to late, July, I'll have someone in and going for that position. The legislative analyst, the requisition went in. HR plans to post it next week. There was a little delay because of shuffling and reassignments over there. Yeah, and when it opens, and this is true for this one and the next, please, I need your help getting the word out. You all have wonderful networks. And so, and thank you, by the way, to the folks who did blog about the administrative assistant position in the council office. I would love it if you would consider doing so again for the legislative analyst position, and letting anybody know who you think would be a good fit. That would be wonderful. And let's see. So the community engagement specialist. So HR plans to send it to Finance Committee on July 11th and not have to do personnel board. So that's a good news. It was moved up so that the hope is here that they get it to finance on the 11th of July. Sorry, I said June, and council on the 12th of July. And then we can put the requisition in right after that. And they should hopefully they should be able to post that next week. So by July 20th, it should be posted. So I'm excited about that one as well. I'm recruiting former alders to participate in interview panels. And yeah, I just wanted to let you all know, thank you for your patience as we work to staff our office. I know that it's been frustrating. Things don't always go as quickly or as smoothly as they should, with Debbie and I working on the tasks of this position that we're trying to hire for the administrative assistant. So I appreciate your continued patience and understanding in that regard. Questions about this piece? VP Curry.
I may have missed it. I'm sorry, but I'm also distracted. Daisy, I'm with you. I'm scared of thunder. And I may have missed this. Did you say how many applicants were passed through from HR?
I did not. We find out on the 17th how many are passed through. They will be passing through on the 17th, and we give 5 business days notice. It's part of what's taking because we have holidays. Both the 20th and the 4th are holidays, and so we're working around those as well. But we'll know Friday how many folks we're interviewing for the first round.
Along the way today, or the last update you had, do you know how many folks have already passed HR screening and would be forwarded on to interview?
I do not. Okay, and then a couple more things I wanted to tell you about. So as you know, the council office by resolution is responsible for staffing the civilian oversight board, the police civilian oversight board, until an independent monitor is secured. And we have posted for an hourly administrative aide to take over that, to give them a dedicated staff member temporarily as I move into this role. And we hope to have, the position closes on the 30th of this month. We hope to have somebody in that position by July 11th. And also the posting for the independent monitor is currently open as well, in case you missed that notification. And I have to say thank you to Michael Gibson from DCR, because she stepped up to help us, to help me share the tasks for COB when I got this new role. And questions about that? And then the only other thing I wanted to just give you heads up on is that I'm working on an operating budget request for the council budget. And I'd like to bring it to CCEC on the 29th for some feedback. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that discussion as well.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that update. Any questions? Karen, I know that the office, obviously for now, is very short-staffed, and really appreciate all the work that both you and Debbie are doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, next item on our agenda, 72109, social events. I'll try to be quick about this because we have some other things and it's on our agenda and it's also getting late and people are distracted by the storms. I'm trying to coordinate a social event with the alders that just left, something casual, possibly at the beer garden, where we could just get together with our former colleagues and casually just hang out. I think the best thing to do at this point is just to send out some of the dates that work for them and see if we can get some sort of consensus on a date that works for a bunch of alders, so we can get together and have a social event. Also, want to see if we could do a social event, and an interesting idea is possibly a potluck or something like that in a park this summer. I know council leadership tried to do something like that last year, and COVID prevented that. But I do think it would be nice to also have another casual ability for us to get together easily. And then at some point, we'll also talk about a holiday party, which is typical that the council has done in non-COVID years. Any thoughts, questions, comments about trying to put something like that together, both the former thing and some sort of potluck? All right, not seeing any. So we'll move on to next agenda item, 72111, Alder onboarding and ongoing training. Really just wanted to get this out there. I don't think we're going to spend too much time on it this evening. And wanted to see if there's maybe a volunteer to maybe set up some parameters for discussion of this. I will give some people some guidance for our new alders, our 3 new alders that have started, or shall I say, 2 new alders mostly, because Alder Fair is the second most experienced alder on our council right now. I've encouraged them all to watch the previous videos. I've encouraged all 3 alders to reach out to every single alder and try to have a Zoom conversation, a coffee, a lunch, as just get to know people. And then I've given them all the options of having mentors, a mentor that is different from previous mentor programs. I actually provided them with a list of different names to pick from and let them pick who they thought would be the best person based on priority areas that those volunteers identified. And so I know Alder Paulson has picked a mentor. I have not heard from Alder Tischler yet if he has picked one. But I'm very curious about, obviously I had to figure out some short-term quick things, but very curious on having longer discussions about everything from that mentor program to the one-on-one reach out. I think one suggestion I've talked about is actually having a list of questions to ask your colleagues, just icebreaker type questions, so people can get conversations going and better understand their new colleagues. And then the training stuff is, I think, where we're going to spend a long time on trying to figure out how to get alders up to speed in a more manageable way than 2 weeks of intense multi-hour training sessions. So you don't have to volunteer here, but if anybody is interested in helping put together a framework for future discussion about this, I think my thought is that we possibly bring in departments and talk to them interactively about different ideas. I spoke to somebody from MPD today, and they had some interesting suggestions about good MPD suggestions for onboarding. Shoot me a note if you're interested in helping with this topic for further discussion at CCEC. All right, the next item on the agenda is Alder salary discussion, 72105. I think this is the start of a discussion that we're going to have at a bunch of meetings. Alder Foster has prepared some stuff for this discussion, and so I'm going to turn the floor over to him.
Thanks, President Furman, and we can keep it, I think, relatively brief tonight as it is getting late. Definitely wanted to tee things up and get people thinking about it and get some feedback. So just in terms of introducing the topic, hopefully everybody's well aware of the recommendations from TFOGs that were put out for a advisory referendum a year ago, including one of the recommendations to move to a smaller full-time and better compensated council. We still, as CCC, we need to circle back, and maybe that'll be even at our next meeting or next couple of meetings to talk about what we want to do with any future referendum questions, but the question of sort of full-time status and pay, as I think everybody understood back then, was not actually something that needs to go out to referendum. It was included as one of the questions, just because we wanted to get all of the kind of TFOGS related recommendations out for feedback. But I'm interested in kind of taking the question of Alder pay, the question of time commitment for serving as Alder, and then the question of compensation or pay for Alders. I think it's something that's really worth a good hearty discussion, and any changes to Alder pay or Alder salaries is something that can only be done for the next term. By state statutes, we can't raise our own salaries, which probably nobody disagrees with. But it is something that I'd like to consider, that I'd like the council to consider for the next term, and it would also be worthwhile. If there is interest to go in that route, it'd be good to have that incorporated into our budget rather than doing a budget amendment to fix it. Kind of the two sides of that I think will help us kind of answer this question, or will tee up a potential proposal, are number one, trying to get some agreement around what we think is a reasonable sort of expected time commitment of Alders to do the job. That's on the one hand, and on the other hand is, what do we think is fair and appropriate compensation for the time that is spent on it. So maybe if somebody could pull up, I've got two documents, maybe pulling up the survey question first, the Word document.
Karen, would you be able to pull up the survey?
Yes, I believe so. One moment.
And so while it's getting pulled up, so my thought on this was to survey current as well as former Alders, and I'd like any thoughts on kind of maybe how far back we should go. I'm thinking maybe not back too far, just because things have changed, and having somebody that was Alder 20 years ago, asking them kind of what they think the requirements of the job are, maybe a little bit less relevant, but would be interested if anybody has any thoughts on that. But then the goal would be to send out a survey that basically asks just a few kind of key questions. So on that top section, this is what I've drafted so far. So again, any feedback tonight, or if anybody wants to just shoot me an email or connect with me. The first question: on average, how many hours do you or did you spend on your Alder and city duties each week? Second question: what are the minimum hours per week that you believe an Alder needs to work in order to do a satisfactory job? Number three, just a little bit different: how many hours per week do you think are ideal for an Alder to do a good job? 4, in your experience, are there any variables that significantly impact the amount of time needed to perform your Alder city duties? And number 5, is there anything else you'd like to share about the time commitment serving as Alder? And then I also thought that while we're doing this, it might also be worthwhile to try and get similar information related to the role of council president, as I think everybody recognizes there's some additional work that can go along with that. So basically a version of kind of the same questions for that one. So maybe I'll just pause quickly on that one. Are there any questions on kind of either what I'm thinking we could accomplish this way, or any immediate reactions or thoughts about the questions themselves? Seeing none, I'll assume everybody's trying to get off this meeting. You want to flip to the other attachment, Karen? And so then this, go ahead, or Chair will go ahead. Go ahead, Alder Figueroa. Cool.
I'm just trying to understand. You giving us homework to track that to be?
No, I'm not asking anybody to track it. It's really, and it's going to be everybody's. If you do track it, have tracked it, great. If not, you're going to just say this is what you think you have been doing, or this is what you think would be a good amount of hours to do the job. So it's
So you want us to take those questions as the official survey, or are you putting it?
No, that's
survey?
that's basically the draft survey. So at this point, what
got
I'm
it.
doing tonight is looking for any feedback. Do you see anything missing that you think would be good to include on the survey? Any questions that you think are confusing that should get reworded? That's really what I'm looking for tonight, or following this meeting. Looks like Alder Bennett's got a question as well.
Yeah, it's not a question, but a thought. I thought for I like how we're going about this, like looking at time spent and money earned. I honestly didn't even realize that we're basically making $15 an hour or something based on like how much we work. But I feel like maybe I don't know if this is an appropriate question to ask in a survey or in like a public discussion, but I would be interested in hearing feedback from other alders if the low amount of pay is or does or does not financially impact them. Like because I know a lot of discussion about this in the past has been, well, some alders need the money, some don't, or so I don't know, something along those lines. So I think it'd be interesting to put data about that, like, well, X amount of alders actually are financially impacted by not receiving just pay.
So something about asking kind of how important the question of pay it was in their decision to run, or how
like how important more like financial impact now does the current alder pay impact how does the current alder pay impact your financial because I don't know, I have an answer to that where my answer is the alder pay pays my rent and that's it, and I have to work another job just so I can have money to pay for food. So
yeah, Alder Bennett. So I appreciate the question a lot. And I think there's probably a few different ways of phrasing that. We're going to hear from a few other people that may have some feedback on that. But I think adding something along those lines is incredibly useful. But just trying to figure out kind of the right, it might be one or two, it might be like two additional questions. Maybe why didn't you run again, or that type of thing, or but thank you for bringing that up. Vice President Curry.
Oh, I didn't realize I was already unmuted. I know the theme or the topic is about alder pay, but considering some of the things we'll be going through about new alder orientation mentorship, do you think it'd be important to include a question in there about if folks feel overcapacitated, what are some resources or what are some things that they feel they could use or would help enhance or optimize their capacity? Or is that kind of not really in line with
kind of like almost like strategies to reduce the time burden, or to kind of to make it work if you don't have as much time as you'd like, or something along those lines?
Yeah, kind of like feedback of I would do better at my job if I was able to do this. Like I know some alders, like for instance, Debbie doing the weekly highlights. If we didn't have that, would alders blog? Or what are some things that are already existing that may be utilized to optimize or enhance capacity? But I don't know if that's really the root of what you're getting to.
I think I got you. And I think maybe the flip side of it is maybe things that aren't in place, but are there areas where if you had different support or more support, you'd be able to reduce number of hours needed to do what you're wanting to do. So, and that one especially seems valuable, I think, in the context of what we're trying to get at. Yeah, maybe so. I think both what Alder Bennett suggested and what you're describing, I'd like to work at trying to incorporate those into the survey.
Alder Figueroa call, go ahead.
And I think I would like to take it back to the core issue that we should be highlighting. It's again trying to find people, more people that represents the issues of the city to run. So so a question for current alders, for example, we have these 2-year terms, which are also ridiculous, but would you, and we have this constant turnaround, like will better pay play into your consideration to run again if you were able to quit your job and do this full time? Like, would you, would that be into consideration? And I feel like that question for current alders brings it even closer than for future alders. Like, if you want to run for council, will that be something that you consider doing a job, which is what we do here at this time? Like, some of us are really working 2 full-time jobs. Would I have considered running if I really understood that? I don't know. I mean, it is 2 full-time jobs. Like, I don't know. I honestly, I don't know if I will thought that I would have the energy and the energy and the willpower, I guess, to be effective. But I think the questions that you have are good, but we should try to frame them from getting more new people to want to participate because they're doing a job that they're getting paid for and they can focus on that job instead of having to supplement it with so many other sources.
Thank you, Alder Figueroa Cole. I just want to at least mention just very quickly, Alder, before Alder Foster, you respond. Just based on the hour, I'd ask that people try to contribute some questions and not necessarily answer them. I think there'll be an opportunity to get into that a little bit more in the future. I think if Alder Foster is looking for some clarification on why you're asking that question, I think there's some value there. But I mean, based on my experience with TFOGs, we could literally spend months talking about these topics, and we did. But I don't want to go down the rabbit hole too much of people's individual experiences, but do think it's helpful to hear these different question ideas to clarify. Just wanted to put that caveat out as there's a few more hands up. Alder Foster, did you want to respond to Alder Figueroa Cole?
No, I think the question of like how would it impact your decision about running again or something, I think is a valuable one. I'd like to maybe pull up that spreadsheet before we get too far in here, because it's basically there's two kind of key questions in my mind. One is around time commitment, which is what in this spreadsheet that's across the top there where it says hours per week. So if you look at cell D2 where it says 20.81, so that's the sort of calculated hours per week that's on the books for this position that is currently paid at the rate of $13.77 per hour, which is cell C3. And that's those two things multiplied together for 52 weeks a year is what gets you 14,904. And so my focus had been for the survey to primarily focus on the question of trying to get a sense of what we collectively believe is sort of an average amount of time that should be expected for alders to do the work. And obviously there'll be different answers there, and there's a range. And so that's what you see across the top. And then sort of the other, I think, very important question is then what about the pay rate? So even if we can all agree that, well, maybe instead of 20.81 hours per week, actually it should be 25, or maybe it should be 30, or maybe it should be 22, or whatever, we want to sort of decide. And there's this also, I think, really important question around pay. And I just want to make sure everybody understands this, because we'll be continuing this conversation, but it'd be good if folks can take a look at it. So again, $13.77 is what we are getting paid today. I just put $15 an hour up there because that's a number that's, folks have probably heard around as like, hey, maybe that should be the minimum wage. It's been thrown around probably for over 5 years. The next number says living wage, 1 adult, 0 children. And that is linked, and I put the link again below where it says Amy Glassmeyer, MIT living wage calculator. I'm not going to go into details about it, but if you click there, there's lots of good information about it. I think it's a really well done analysis that for many metro areas in the U.S., including Madison. And what that does is basically calculates on a few different kind of household situations what the actual expected minimum living wage would be in order to not require additional financial financial assistance. And when you read the FAQs around that, it's pretty clear. It's still very much a base living wage. This doesn't mean you get to take a vacation and go anywhere. It doesn't mean you get to buy out stuff that you don't necessarily need. But it does include things like, paying your an internet bill and those sorts of things that are pretty standard for folks. So if you see there, for 1 adult working a full-time job without supporting any children or any other adults, the value that was published was $17.52 an hour, and that's calculated off of a June 2021 value. That column C is adjusted for the consumer price index inflation, which is, I think folks know, has been pretty high recently. So, over 7% in not even a year from those values. So that column C is basically taking the values that were published and bringing them up to today via inflation. So that would mean that today, theoretically, you would need something more like $18.85 an hour to be able to live in Madison as a single adult. The next one is City of Madison minimum. So that's currently at $19.04. There's some caveats to that, and I can share more information from finance. That's for permanent positions. So it excludes a few different things. It also excludes some positions like working in the food service part of the Gulf enterprise where there's tips included and some other things, but that's currently the lowest pay for a permanent position at the city. The next one's living wage for 2 working adults with a child. Now you're up to about $21 an hour. The actual median wage in Madison, so that's the second link on the bottom, which is sort of the Bureau of Labor Statistics information adjusted for inflation is actually almost $26 an hour. Going down, mean wage is over $31. The City of Madison employee median is nearly $33 an hour, and the mean is getting up towards $35 an hour. And you can go into more details from there. And then basically, as you go across again to the right, if you want to see what an annual salary would be for a full-time 40-hour position, that's that last column X for all of those different hourly rates. So I don't, that's kind of the amount of information I was hoping to share tonight. Happy to answer any questions on this, but really, I think this is a super important question for me, both in terms of the role of Alder. And I think it's really important that we're also just very honest about what the job takes and that we're sharing that with future prospective Alders. I think is just really critically important. And then I also have just very strong feelings around the living wage and around what we should be pushing for as a community. And when we talk about setting an example, and so I'd like to make sure we are having some really good conversations around both of those questions. And that's what I tried to tee up with the spreadsheet. So I think I'll leave it at there and able to answer any questions if folks have them.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Paulson, you've had your hand up for a bit. Go ahead. Alder Figueroa, did you want to clarify something from before?
Yeah, I did. I want to just make sure that I'm clear. So we are focusing on the wage increase, right? So that will be like many of the questions that you had in there are kind of targeting that. But I wasn't sure. I thought that we were talking also about full-time versus part-time, then I thought maybe we weren't, but at the end there, when you had the graph all the way to the 40 hours, we in essence also talking about that possibility. So there's like multiple layers in here going on, and I just want to make sure that, so I feel then that the questions that we have, perhaps, yeah, maybe we should segregate them on the two different topics because they are very distinct. We can accomplish perhaps at some point, get the wage increase without really discussing the, without coming to a resolution into the full-time part. You know what I mean? We may have a resolution that says, yeah, we would raise the wages, but we're not going to deal with that second part and still continue to work towards it. So I think perhaps we need to separate set of questions, and I can send out some thoughts on that later, but just wanted to clarify that I don't know. I think the questions at the beginning are mainly for the wage increase part, meaning how many hours are you working and should you be paid properly about that? And then the second part of the question will be you.
So yeah, maybe I can help clarify. So, I mean, ultimately, if the council wanted to take action, so right now, if we do nothing, via ordinance, Alder pay is sort of pegged to some management pay, and we kind of trail behind that and get increases as certain employee folks get increases. If we did want to make a change, when we could do whatever we want, but it most likely would be, here's an annual salary amount. And we don't have to describe it in terms of an hourly rate and a number of hours, and we can choose whatever number we want. I've sort of chosen to create that matrix. And I think most of us are familiar with the concept of a certain number of hours of work per week and a certain pay. And again, those can turn into an annual salary. My intent with the survey was to really focus on the question of how many hours worked. I'm very interested in sort of the collective knowledge or beliefs around that. And it's also why I thought it'd be helpful to go to some past alders as well. I think the question of, what people's thoughts are about what's a fair kind of hourly rate, I assumed would come out in discussion, and didn't feel as compelled to get that kind of information via the survey, nor from previous alders, as I think that's just more of a policy question of what do we think the job should be.
Okay, so for the second question about part-time to full-time, I don't know if in your calculations you also considering like benefits, and I just leave it at that, like that, if that is baked into your numbers. I wasn't sure.
That's pay. So benefits would be in addition, as they are today. And I would just say explicitly, the feedback that I got when we did put this question out on the advisory referendum, I heard from so many people that said, well, I don't really like the idea of a full-time or like professional, but I'm totally on board with alders getting paid more, and I don't even know how many hours you work, et cetera. And I think that was a big part of that. The challenge with that is defining what's full-time. Does that mean you can't have another job, et cetera? From my perspective, that's really kind of irrelevant. And so I'm really just personally don't think we need to ask that question. Do you think full-time, yes or no, or part-time? And that's why I'm trying to get a better sense of just what's our best understanding or belief around how many hours per week this job takes. And we don't have to call it part-time or full-time. We just say, this is the amount of workload. And then separately, we can decide what we think the compensation should be, having a rough idea of at least what current and former alders think the workload is.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Alder Paulson, go ahead.
I think I'm going to ask the question he just answered, but I'm sorry. I just want to ask it a little bit different, make sure I understand. So the point of the survey here is explicitly not to try and get a sense from folks, how much money do you need to have people participate? Right, that's not what you're asking right now.
Yeah, my intent with the survey is really to get the best sense around the time commitment.
Okay.
I'm open to including questions around pay, but I don't want to go too far down that path, because I assume that that will come out in our discussion, and that's a little bit more of a kind of a values-based sort of policy conversation and discussion that we could survey alders on, but I don't know if that's really going to
Right.
give us more information.
But the reason I ask is because if we are surveying alders for, did compensation factor into why you ran? You're going to get a survivorship bias question, and we need to find the people who aren't running and include them in the survey. Maybe people who are serving on city committees, people who go through programs like Emerge or New Leaders Council, people who from the neighborhood association sort of thing. So I think there's traditional pipelines that we could go to and ask and see what would you need to make the hop. The only other thing I would, on the full-time versus part-time thing, I would actually have to go and look exactly what my policy is at the company. But I think part of the reason I can have this job is because it's explicitly not a full-time job. So I'd be really nervous about any designation as a full-time. I think the company is like, no, you can't have two full-time jobs. And because this one isn't a full-time job, they don't actually care about the number of hours, but they care about the full-time designation. So that is a trickier conversation.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, I believe the mayor's position, and at least I know there's some positions that are in our ordinance that say there's an expectation that this is sort of your full-time commitment, or I forget what the exact language is, but yeah. So I think it was just true at the UW that I was only allowed to have one full-time position under like state law or something. So thanks.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Thank you, Alder Foster. The numbers that Alder Foster shared about the hours, I don't believe that's codified anywhere where we say, it's 20, whatever that 20 point whatever numbers is. I just think that's how payroll is treating it, and I think that's a good opportunity to judge this and the kind of the point of trying to figure out what that right number is and then the salary. Alder Foster, is that correct?
Yeah, we could double check, but I think it might be connected to the question of benefits. So it might be the minimum number of hours needed to qualify for like health insurance. So we can figure that out, but I think it's not totally random.
And so I think, but I also think going forward, there's no reason necessarily to codify it. I think these numbers are just helpful to think about when we're thinking about trying to define a salary. That was, one of the things when it came to full-time, it comes down to not whether or not it's a designation or are people being properly compensated for the time they're putting in, and is this position open to enough people based on what the salary is. And hopefully these questions that Alder Foster has come up with and the suggestions that we hear tonight, we can get a better idea. I think Alder Foster's got some notes. I think we can put this on the agenda for next time. There was a salary change at some point, and I'm wondering if that could be a good cutoff. Do you, Alder Foster, possibly recall when the salary did change? I know obviously it changes based on the percentages you talked about, but at some point there was a change in our ordinance.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. The change in pay happens at the term changeover. What you're asking, when the ordinance was updated and when?
Yeah, there was a change in the ordinance where all of a sudden salaries changed, and then obviously pegged it based on percentages for the following terms, et cetera. But
I think like 5-ish years ago, but yeah, don't quote me on it.
Okay. All right. So we'll have more to talk about that at the next meeting. If you have other thoughts, certainly reach out to Alder Foster. But hopefully we could finalize something at our next meeting and see if we can get some research and continue this discussion. I think that's probably a good place to pivot into a very quick conversation because I know it's late. People are tired. Future agenda items. So legislative item 72112. I believe attached to this. I don't know if this was a new one or just our previous. Let me see if there's anything attached. Sorry. So I don't have a ton to share for this other than to give you a little bit of an idea of what's on our next agenda. I do think that, even based on our experience this evening, that probably having, more than 5 items on our agenda is a heavy lift, especially if we have a major item like what is hybrid? Obviously, actually, we had 6 items today because we should count public comment. At our next meeting, I will let everybody know we're going to have several things that were referred to us that I think will take up a large amount of time, or could take up a large amount of time. So definitely refer to our next meeting as the Code of Conduct /Harassment/Dispute Resolution Policy stuff. Legislative item 70642. We have 2 items related to self-evaluation of subunits. Then we have an item related to cancellation of subunit meetings. So I do expect a chunk of our time to be taken up from there. I would like to see this Alder salary discussion continue so we get that finalized and start collecting some data. Other things that I have penciled in that have continued to kind of move to this is discussions of the council budget, discussions of the referendum, video recording of BCC meetings and BCC structure. I went through that very quickly, but I'll say again, BCC structure, video recording of BCC meetings, council budget and referendum. Are there things that people really would like to see on our next agenda that in that list that they want to speak up to now? There is no shortage of things for us to talk about, and we're going to try to get more organized about having a roadmap and saying, okay, we'll talk about this in September, October, et cetera. But at least wanted to throw it out to the body if they had any suggestions on our next meeting or just want me to make my best judgment. I will make the best judgment on our next agenda. And I recognize that people probably don't want to meet for 3 or 4 hours. I thank everybody for their participation this evening. I might have found this to be helpful, and we'll be following up with emails to all alders about some of these discussions and the social events, et cetera. So unless anybody has anything else related to future agenda items, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Seeing no objection, I'm going to assume unanimous consent. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you so much.
Right.